Okay, so as we continue social psychology in 4.2, we're talking about some of our attitudes towards people. We're talking attitudes towards groups. We'll also talk about how our attitudes can change, and we'll have a little bit more about that when we try to change other people's, but we'll talk about our attitudes, about some of our own behaviors, our own traits can change as well. And you'll find out that social psychology is very vocab heavy. So you're getting all of these things that you see out in the world, or all these behaviors about people, or all these tendencies of people, or social phenomenon about people when they're interacting with others. But you've seen all these things, right? They're now being labeled, and so you're really trying to attach the vocabulary so that you can apply it in a real world scenario. All right. So we're going to start off with stereotypes and implicit attitudes towards other people. Okay, a stereotype is a generalized belief about a particular group of people. So these can be positive, right? Oh, these people are smart, all right, or it could be negative. Oh, these people can't drive, right? But they're basically just completely overgeneralizing the traits of a few individuals that are in that group and just assuming that everybody in that group is that way. Saying all teenagers are rebellious against teenagers against adults is incorrect, right? There are kids out there that don't do that. And by just assuming that they do, you can affect their self-esteem and their ability to interact socially with other people if they believe they're already prejudged, right? Which leads to the different types of, like some sort of, generalized bad behaviors or attitudes towards other people. The first one is an attitude. This is called prejudice, okay? This is a preconceived opinion or attitude about an individual group that is based on these stereotypes we have and doesn't have any real factual, basis. And almost always these prejudices are negative and very emotional. So they can lead to like social exclusion. I don't want you to be a part of my life or a part of my group. And it can lead to sort of really impactful behaviors, and that is where we go to discrimination, right? Where prejudice is this attitude, right, that's usually negative and has like an emotional basis, like these people are to blame, right? But that's just an attitude. Those attitudes can lead to discrimination, which are the behaviors directed towards an individual that's part of a group, right? Based on your prejudice towards them. So your exclusion of allowing them to participate in something because of who they are, right, would be an act of discrimination based on their membership in a group. And so while prejudices are not illegal because they're just attitudes, right? Like they're not actions towards others. Discrimination is often illegal, right? Because discrimination acts are actual actions, that are directed towards the group that are harmful to them based on the prejudices that you have. All right. So just to review, you have the little picture there with these cookie cutter sort of cutouts for who we think people are as their membership to a group, right? Because of their membership to a group. And so stereotypes are these false assumptions, right? The prejudice is the negative attitude that we have towards them because they are part of the group. And discrimination is the actual, behavior that we act out against them because of our prejudice. So some sort of behavior that we do that is directed negatively towards them, like an exclusion, right? Or a violent act. Those are discriminationally, behaviors that are connected to our prejudice. Okay, so we have to kind of understand what an implicit attitude is. Like some of these things that we've discovered, like prejudice, can be implicit, meaning that many people don't ever get to the discrimination part, or they don't realize they get to the discrimination part of an individual because of their membership to the group, because a lot of what is happening in their sort of evaluation of others is happening at an unconscious level. So, like an example, we are scared of an unknown man in the dark at night, and so we don't really think we're scared, but we unconsciously just decide to cross the street to get away from them. We didn't realize that we crossed that street because of our implicit attitude towards that individual, right? So implicit attitudes can influence our behavior without us really recognizing it. So not purposeful discrimination. An unconscious sort of act, like an employer sort of favoring candidates that come from certain backgrounds as opposed to others without really realizing it, right? Until you look at the data and you see the hiring habits, you wouldn't realize that there was some sort of maybe possible implicit attitude that was directing those actions, right? Another aspect of sort of our implicit attitudes is sort of our viewpoint of other people's situations and behaviors and our own, right? An example of that would be a just world phenomenon. This is sort of our cognitive bias that individuals tend to believe that people get what they deserve in the world. And we know that's just not true, right? So that if we see a homeless individual, we believe that they were on drugs and they are lazy or something like that. But there could be situational things that caused where they're at. And our just world phenomenon sort of relieves us from the stress that, of our social comparison where we have it so much better than others. Because if we believe that we have it better because we deserved it, right? We feel good about that, and we feel that others that don't have as much, they deserved their situation, right? That just helps us implicitly sort of deal with the social world around us. Another thing is that there tends to be some sort of ethnocentrism, right? This like sort of idea that our group or our culture sort of has it figured out right. And sometimes that can lead us to impose our will on other people without realizing it, right? The idea that, we've got it right and you don't can lead to tension, right? And socially when you're trying to, maybe impose one's culture on someone else because you just inherently believe that it's better, right? We also need to talk about that when we talk about out-group and in-group, right? The idea of when an out-group is the group that we don't belong to, which are many groups, right? And then the in-group is a group that we belong to. So if we were looking at high schools, Lucy Beckham is our in-group, and all the other high schools, James Island and Wando, those are out-groups. And when we view the out-group, right, the groups, the members of the group that we're not a part of, like people of other, fans of other teams, things like that, we tend to think of them as all the same. Right? Speaking of stereotypes, right? We tend to give them like these homogeneous traits that they all are, terrible people who, I know like Georgia fans, all Georgia fans bark at people, right? Because I'm a big Georgia fan, and I know that some people think that all Georgia fans, when they're out, bark at other fans, right? Which is not true, but that's part of sort of the out-group sort of bias when a group that's not Georgia fans looks at that out-group of Georgia fans, right? And then the opposite is this in-group bias. We tend to have favoritism and preference for people who are members of our own group. Our own neighborhood people in our neighborhood get chances. They get second chances. They get understanding. People whose same behaviors might be outside of our neighborhood and we don't know them may not get those second chances from them, right? We may favor our colleagues that we work with over other people just because we have sort of this cohesion, this connection with them. So we kind of always have this preference for the people part of our group, but that also leads us to a bias for the people outside of our groups. And here you see, right, the implicit attitude. You see the figure outside the circle group, right? Just world phenomenon. People get what they deserve. That helps us deal with the cognitive issue of social comparison. When we may have a better situation than others, we tend to believe that we deserved it from our hard work, and they did something to deserve their situation. That outgroup homogeneous sort of bias. The idea that all members of the group that's not ours, they're all the same, right? That all James Island High School kids are the same compared to, like the individuality within our own group, that we notice that there's individuals in Lucy Beckham, but we view all Wando kids the same, all James Island kids the same. In-group bias, out-group bias, the idea that we favor those that are part of our group, right? In that circle, you see it in blue, and then the people on the outside, we don't tend to favor, right? We don't give them the same kindness or second chances or empathy that we do the people in our group. And then ethnocentrism, the idea that once you favor your group so much, you might tend to implicitly think that your group has it right? And you might try to impose implicitly like your group's culture on other people. All right. Some of these things socially can really be persistent, right? With these sort of cognitive issues of sort of processing our own behavior. So belief, perseverance, our belief about some of these things that are not true, that are, these stereotypes or these ethnocentrisms, these biases that we have, they may continue even when we're given evidence that proves us the other, right? To the contrary, just because our cognitive, tendency of belief perseverance, that even when we see the evidence that goes against these things, these implicit thoughts, these attitudes that we have, they still continue because of that cognitive tendency. And then there's also confirmation bias that really continues these stereotypes and these attitudes towards others, because all we need is a little tiny bit of evidence to prove what we thought, and we can discard all the other evidence that goes against what we thought, and therefore these sort of things continue. Right, so these are just things that we've reviewed from the past. Belief, perseverance, like the people have a certain belief about others. They may see other, like, oh, all these group of people, they can't drive. All of a sudden you see this evidence of a professional driver being a member of that group that you thought couldn't drive, but it doesn't matter. You still believe that group as a whole just cannot drive. And so that's an example of belief, perseverance. Or on the other side, confirmation bias. You believe that the members of this group cannot drive. You find one member of that group that has an accident or does something terrible, stupid driving, and you have a video of it, and it just reaffirms everything you believed, and you discard all the mountain of evidence of that is out there that people of that group can drive, right? And so then you see that that's how these things can perpetuate these social phenomena. All right, we all finally got to talk about sort of our attitude change in ourself, and this is a big one: cognitive dissonance. All right, this is huge, and it's really three-pronged, right? You have an original belief about your behaviors or your just your attitudes in general. You have an existing belief or attitude, right? We're gonna say that drugs are bad. So you've been taught your whole life that drugs are bad. Your parents have instilled this in you. You have a belief that drugs are bad. You believe that drugs will do something bad to you physically. You believe that drugs will do something bad to you emotionally. And so you are, in your mind, you're avoiding drugs for your entire life, right? But then something about your behavior clashes with the belief. Something that you do goes against what you originally believed. So you're at a party and you consume drugs, and now you feel anxiety and internal guilt and distress because the actions that you did directly conflicted with your existing attitude or belief. So we have this existing belief. Now we have this behavior that goes against that existing belief. And then the third thing we have now is a guilt or discomfort or stress internally, right? That because these two things are conflicting. Now, our human tendency is to always reduce that conflict, that stress, that guilt that we feel inside. So we could change the behavior to match up with our attitudes, and that's possible. Or we may actually change our attitude to match up with our behavior, right? So that we feel better about ourselves. So someone who's doing the drug may say, this drug is not as bad as alcohol, and therefore they don't feel as guilty for doing it, even though it went against their original belief. And that rationalization will help alleviate the psychological discomfort, and it can explain how someone who had an attitude, right, can do an action against that attitude, and that attitude, right, actually changes to line up with that behavior, and they change who they are, right? And this is cognitive dissonance. The action goes against the attitude. It causes the anxiety, and we are driven to reduce that anxiety, and therefore our original attitudes can change. And we'll see this in the Zimbardo prison experiment. When we watch the video of the social psychologist Philip Zimbardo, you'll see the people who were the guards in the study. Right? They were obviously doing things that probably went against their morality in the study. And yet, when they're asked about it after the fact, you can see that their attitudes about their behaviors changed. They rationalize it. Oh, I thought that's what the study wanted, so that's why I did it. So there's like this relief internally of what they did going against what their original attitude was. And that's how our attitudes can change and then align with our behaviors. And then we can see major behavior change in people who have shown us different behavior patterns all the time before. All right, we're going to move on to more exciting social psychology stuff next. See ya.